She rubbed the stains on the table as they rubbed their contempt on her. Laughter, whispers, condescending glances, all the things she was used to. To them, she was invisible, just part of the background. But tomorrow they will see her for real. At the end of the story, leave your opinion below. And don't forget to subscribe, and we'll continue. The light-colored marble floor shone in the morning sun, reflecting the glitter of expensive shoes and sparkling employee watches. The office of Barton and Avery, a prestigious consulting firm in the heart of Chicago, was waking up to a new day. Fidgety assistants, phones ringing, a nod here, a handshake there. A typical day for people in good company, but not for Loretta Myers. A 35-year-old woman, dark-skinned, with the posture of someone who'd been through too much, she rolled her cart of cleaning supplies carefully down the corridor. Her gray uniform was clean but faded, and her hands were steady and quick, a habit developed over the years. She didn't notice the stares, because no one was looking at her. In the corner by the coffee machine, 3 employees were talking. Raymond Harper, the finance director, tall, thin, and with a brilliant smile of a man who had never heard the word no. Matthew Donovan, the lawyer, and Stephanie Reed, the public relations specialist, threw Loretta a brief glance. Honestly, Raymond stretched out, stirring his coffee, I'd shoot myself if I worked as a janitor. Have you seen how long they've been hanging around? Matthew chuckled. Either they love their jobs, or they're just no good. Or just used to being invisible. Stephanie grinned, crossing her arms. Loretta didn't stop, didn't flinch, didn't give away a single emotion, wiping the stains off the table. But Max Stanton, the young intern standing by the window with a cup of espresso, tensed. He wasn't participating in the conversation, but he heard every word. Loretta finished cleaning up and walked smoothly out into the hallway. Outside the walls of the office, in the world of these people, she is a nobody. The morning chaos in the office gradually turned into a rhythmic flow of work, where each employee was like a cog in a perfectly fine-tuned machine. Phones were ringing, printers were buzzing, meeting rooms were filled with business conversations. And somewhere in a far corner, unnoticed and unrecognized, Loretta Myers was moving. She knew this building like the back of her hand. Every room, every partition, every desk where people in impeccably pressed suits sat. She knew who left breakfast crumbs on their keyboards, who didn't clean up their empty cups, who splashed coffee drops on the glass conference room table and never thought about who was cleaning up after them. At 8:45 a.m., when most employees had already laid out their laptops, checked email, and made their first calls, Loretta entered the Seattle conference room to prepare for the morning management meeting. She moved with confident, crisp movements, wiping fingerprints off the table, straightening chairs, cleaning up the remnants of yesterday's meetings. 3 men entered the room, Raymond Harper, Matthew Donovan, and Stephanie Reed, the same ones who had taunted the janitors just half an hour ago. Loretta didn't look up, continuing her work as if their presence didn't matter. But they noticed her. Raymond, with a perpetually smug grin, stopped at the door, lazily watching her actions. I don't think I could do it for 20 years, he said, leaning back in his chair. I don't see how anyone could live their life picking up trash after other people. Matthew grinned, not looking away from his phone screen. She probably makes more money on overtime than our interns. Stephanie folded her arms across her chest and shook her head as a surprise at their patience. Actually, it's kind of sad. Imagine wiping tables all your life, and no one even remembers your name. Loretta didn't stop, didn't let on that she heard every word. She wiped the table carefully with a damp cloth, slow, deliberate movements, as if concentrating on removing not just the dust, but their contempt, their squeamish glances, their poisoned words. But Max Stanton saw everything. He sat at his desk against the glass wall of the conference room and couldn't help but hear these conversations. He was uncomfortable. The feeling that had begun to gnaw at his insides that morning had now grown to fill his chest with a heavy weight. He could see Loretta's lips pressed tightly together, her movement a little stiffer, her fingers clenching the cloth of the napkin. But she was silent. She just finished her work, picked up the bucket, and headed for the exit. And when her fingers touched the door, Raymond laughed. It must be nice to have no real stress. No deadlines, no meetings, no decisions. just a rag and a paycheck. Loretta lingered for a split second, so briefly that no one noticed except Max. The workday was coming to an end, and the office bustle was fading. The staff dispersed, leaving behind a chaos of empty paper cups, dried lunch crumbs, and abandoned papers on their desks. Tired employees yawned, turned off their monitors, picked up their briefcases, and went out into the corridors, chatting about the evening's plans. But Loretta Meyer's workday was just beginning. She wheeled her cart through the hallways, silently cleaning up whatever was left behind by those who didn't even notice her presence. A familiar sight awaited her in the Seattle conference room. Chairs in disarray, a table covered in greasy fingerprints, paper napkins strewn about. Someone had carelessly spilled a drop of coffee on the glass surface. She slowly ran a damp rag across the table, wiping away not only the dirt, but all the unpleasantness she had to deal with every day. A loud voice from the hallway interrupted the silence. "Is she still here?" The familiar mocking tone sounded. Loretta froze, not turning toward the door, but her hands continued to move methodically. There were 3 men standing in the doorway: Raymond Harper, Matthew Donovan, and Stephanie Reed. "Imagine working as a janitor your whole life," Raymond snorted, walking past a glass wall. "How useless you'd have to be not to rise above that." "I bet she's stalling on purpose to get more overtime," Matthew grinned, fingering the screen of his phone. "She must be proud of every extra dollar in her paycheck." Stephanie laughed briefly, shrugging her shoulders. What if it's just a dream of hers? After all, not everyone is destined to be someone important. Loretta exhaled, but didn't flinch. She had long ago stopped reacting to such talk. But Max Stanton was once again a witness. He was about to go home, but he forgot his laptop in the conference room. When he entered, he saw Loretta and heard their conversation. He looked at Loretta. She didn't react in any way, but just continued her work as if nothing had happened. But when she raised her head, their gazes met. There was no anger, resentment, or rage in her eyes, just patience, like she already knew how this was going to end. Max wanted to tell them they were wrong. He wanted to put them in their place, but he couldn't risk his career for a cleaning lady. Loretta finished, carefully put the rag away, and left the room without a word. Early morning at the Barton and Avery office was always like a busy anthill. Employees hurried into the building holding hot cups of coffee, checking smartphones and discussing pressing matters as they went. The lobby was filled with the echo of quick footsteps, rustling sheets of diaries, short phrases about upcoming meetings and reports. Raymond Harper entered the building, as always, with a confident gait of man who considers himself the master of the place. His suit fit his trim figure impeccably, and his expensive watch glistened on his wrist in the morning light. Matthew Donovan and Stephanie Reed followed him, casually discussing plans for the evening. There was no sign of trouble. But once they opened the email, the morning rhythm of the office was disrupted. Subject line: mandatory management meeting. Manhattan conference room. 9 a.m. Raymond frowned, running his eyes over the short text. Such urgent meetings were never just for fun. They always carried something important. Perhaps a reshuffle was coming, or some client demanded a renegotiation of contracts. In any case, whatever it was, he was sure it didn't concern him personally. Stephanie, unlike him, sensed something amiss. "Don't you think that's strange?" she asked, furrowing her eyebrows. Why didn't anyone explain the reason? Matthew only shrugged, not looking away from his phone screen. "Probably just another corporate change," he replied indifferently. "Or a new client has been signed, and they want to make an announcement." Raymond grinned, glancing at the clock screen. "In any case, it's not something that can surprise us." 8:59 a.m. Manhattan Conference Hall. The leaders took their seats at the massive glass table, chatting as they waited for the meeting to begin. The atmosphere in the room was tense, but no one realized how much their world would change in the next few minutes. The door opened, and a person they hadn't expected to see in a place like this entered the room. And it was Loretta Myers. But she wasn't wearing her faded gray uniform today. She was dressed in an impeccably fitting, elegant dark blue pantsuit. Her hair was neatly styled, and an expensive silver watch gleamed on her wrist. She wasn't carrying a bucket of rags. She wasn't pushing a cart of cleaning supplies in front of her. Raymond froze, blinking several times as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Stephanie literally felt the air go out her lungs. Matthew shifted his gaze from Loretta to the others, as if expecting someone to explain this nightmarish surprise. She walked slowly to the main seat at the table and lowered herself smoothly into the chair, then looked directly into the eyes of each of them and smiled. "Good morning, gentlemen." The silence in the Manhattan conference room was heavier than lead. The air was filled with a tension that made it seem as if the walls had begun to shrink, trapping those present. Raymond Harper, Matthew Donavani, and Stephanie Reed were sitting in chairs, but they looked as if they had just been pulled out of their familiar world and placed in front of something inexplicable. Loretta Myers didn't say a word. She just sat there, watching their reactions, letting them realize their new reality. Raymond was the first to speak, but his voice sounded uncertain. "Excuse me, but what's going on here?" Loretta bowed her head, her expression remaining impeccably calm, as if this was all part of a well-thought-out plan. "I think you should know who you're talking to." Her voice was low, confident, penetrating straight to the mind. "My name is Loretta Myers. I'm the CEO of Myers Facility Management." "W what?" His lips twitched, as if his brain hadn't yet had time to comprehend what he was hearing. Stephanie slowly shifted back in her chair, feeling her palms cover with cold sweat. "Is this some kind of joke?" Her voice shook, and her eyes darted nervously around the room. Loretta leaned forward only slightly, resting her palms on the table as if assessing their fear. "Myers Facility Management is a company that has held the maintenance contract for this building for 10 years, she continued. "My company." Before Raymond, Matthew, and Stephanie's eyes, the world cracked, shattering into pieces. All their taunts, squeamish looks, and talking behind their backs. Now there were consequences. Raymond was the first to try to regain his composure. He took a deep breath, folded his hands on the table, and spoke in a tone that still had a shadow of his former self-confidence. "Look, I think we can all agree that there may have been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" She looked directly at him, and he felt a chill run down his spine. "You call this a misunderstanding?" She slowly leaned back, giving him a chance to digest what was happening. "I've watched you for a long time. I've seen how you treat those you consider beneath you. I've heard every word you've said. I've heard you laugh at me while I cleaned up your garbage. I think you, perhaps, misunderstood us." He looked at Stephanie, hoping for support. But Stephanie kept quiet because she realized they were caught. Loretta leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. "No, gentlemen, I understood you quite correctly." No one in the Manhattan conference room dared to break the silence. The air was thick, heavy, saturated with tension that could not be cut even with a sharp knife. Raymond Harper, Matthew Donovan, and Stephanie Reed sat glued to their leather chairs, unable to believe what was happening. Loretta Myers studied them. She didn't speak, didn't rush, didn't raise her voice, but it was that pause that seemed to hit hardest. Raymond, who had always felt like the top predator in this office, now looked confused and vulnerable. He could no longer rely on his charm, his power, his money, or his connections. Today, sitting before him was a woman he had not only underestimated, he had humiliated her. "Look," he began, trying to make his voice sound confident, but the trembling in his hands betrayed his nervousness. "We didn't know who you were. If we had known..." Loretta raised her head sharply. "If you knew I owned this company, would you speak differently?" "You must understand, Dash," he began. But Loretta interrupted him gently. "No, that's what you have to understand." She rose slowly from her chair, placing her hands on the table, leaning a little closer, so that each word sounded threateningly distinct. "I've watched you for years. I've heard you mock the people who make this office fit for work every day. I've seen you walk past the cleaning staff without even giving them a glance. I know you've never thought about who is picking up after you." Stephanie faded her gaze, her normally confident eyes now darting around the table as if looking for a way out. "That's not what we meant to say," she mumbled, but her voice sounded pathetic and unconvincing. Loretta straightened up and crossed her arms over her chest. "No, that's exactly what you wanted to say. You just don't like it now that your words are coming back to you." She took a step back and shifted her gaze from one face to the other, enjoying their confusion. "And now I have a solution," she said slowly, letting each word sink into their minds. Raymond froze in anticipation and asked, "What solution?" he asked, his voice trembling, betraying his confusion and fear. Loretta tilted her head to the side, as if studying them like a predator playing with its prey. "My company is renegotiating a contract with Barton and Avery today." "What?" Yuri saying that. What I'm saying is that maybe you don't deserve our cooperation anymore." Stephanie sighed convulsively, her shoulders shaking finely. You can't do that," she murmured, but her voice didn't have the confidence it had before. Loretta shrugged slightly. "I can do anything." Those words felt like the heavy seal of a condemned document. Matthew looked at Raymond, then at Stephanie, then back at Loretta. It was just a misunderstanding. He tried to grasp at straws. "A business mistake, perhaps." Loretta leaned forward and laughed softly. "No, Matthew, that was your way of thinking." She let those words hang in the air before adding, "And now you're going to have to answer for it." The silence in the Manhattan conference room seemed almost ominous after Loretta Myers had left. No one had dared to say a word, as if any word spoken could only make the situation worse. Raymond Harper, Matthew Donovan, and Stephanie Reed sat in confusion. Raymond ran his hand nervously through his hair, his self-confidence evaporating. "We can't let her break her contract." His voice was harsh, but it lacked the force that usually made his subordinates obey him unquestioningly. Matthew frowned, rubbing his temples. Did she seriously say that? His voice sounded like he was hoping someone would answer him no. Maybe it was just a bluff? Stephanie exhaled heavily, glancing at the closed door. "Do you really think this is a bluff?" Her voice sounded annoyed, which was rare for her. "She just crushed us into dust. And you think it was just a game?" Raymond ran his hand over his face again, his thoughts darting about, trying to find a way out. "We need a plan. We need something to get her to change her mind." But no one knew exactly what to do. And that's when Max Stanton spoke. The intern, who had been sitting in the corner all this time watching the chaos unfold, finally got up from his seat and walked closer to the table. "You don't see what the problem is, do you?" All three of them looked at him as if they had just realized his existence. "What?" Raymond squinted his eyes, as if he couldn't believe that a boy trainee dared talk to them. Max didn't flinch. "You think she made you a demand, but she didn't." He looked directly at them, unafraid of their stares. "She gave you a chance to prove yourself worthy of her company." Matthew snorted, crossing his arms over his chest. "And how do you think we're supposed to prove it?" Max leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. "Change your attitude. Not just her. Everyone. Are you suggesting we suddenly become nice to everyone?" "No. I suggest you learn to respect people, even if they're not on the same rung of the social ladder as you. It's been 3 days. Everything in the office has changed." Supervisors who had previously overlooked the cleaners were now having conversations with them. People began to appreciate the work of those who were previously invisible. Employees stopped leaving dirty mugs on tables, treated the cleaning team with respect, and said their names for the first time. It didn't happen on orders from above. It happened because the fear of loss led to realization. And that's why Loretta Myers is back in the Manhattan conference room. This time, she didn't have to talk long. She walked her gaze over the people present. She saw real change, not strained smiles, but actions that actually meant something. "You understood the lesson," she said, "and that's why we continue to work with you." 3 days ago, they were trembling in fear of her decision. Now they were trembling with the realization of how close they were to disaster. As Loretta left the room, Max met her gaze and nodded. She nodded in response. The story wasn't about revenge. It was a story about how respect cannot be demanded. It can only be earned. Thanks for watching. Leave your opinion below